I thought it was a bear standing behind Scott's tent, until it rose past 7 feet and kept going. I'm not new to Washington trails. I've logged enough miles on the Cascades to know what belongs and what doesn't. Scott and I have been hiking together since college, and we keep it simple. No heroics, no off-trail bushwhacking, just clean weekends in the mountains when work allows it. Late September, we planned an overnight at Lake Serene. It's a popular trail out of the town of Index, 4 miles in with about 2,000 feet of gain. Most people day hike it, snap photos at the lake, and head back down. We wanted to camp at the upper basin where the permit system keeps numbers low and the crowd thins out after sunset. The weather report called for clear skies and overnight lows in the mid-30s. We left Seattle before dawn on a Saturday, hit the trailhead by 7:30 a.m., and signed the register. Our packs were light. 2-person tents, sleeping bags rated to 20 degrees, bear canisters with 3 days of food, water filters, first aid, headlamps, and a small cook system. We both carried paper maps in chest pockets and had downloaded the offline trail data. This wasn't our first time at Serene, but it was our first time camping there in fall. The hike in was steady. Switchbacks through second-growth Douglas fir and western hemlock. The trail was dry and well-maintained with rock steps and wooden water bars to manage erosion. We passed a handful of day hikers on their way down, all friendly, all moving at a good pace. The forest smelled like wet bark and moss. Mushrooms pushed up through the duff in little clusters. Sword ferns lined the trail, still green but starting to yellow at the tips. By 11 a.m., we reached Bridal Veil Falls. The spray misted the observation platform and we stopped to refill water bottles and add our filter tabs. From there, the trail steepened and the trees thinned as we gained elevation. We could see chunks of granite pushing through the soil and the outline of the basin rim above us. At 1 p.m., we crested the final rise and Lake Serene opened up in front of us. The water was that cold, mineral blue you only get from snowmelt. Granite cliffs rose on 3 sides, and a few scattered subalpine firs clung to the rock edges. The established camp zone sat on the northeast side, a flat area with fire rings built from stacked stone and a few tent pads leveled into the slope. We were the only ones there. We set up our tents about 20 feet apart, staked them tight, and ran our bear canisters down to the designated storage area near the lake edge. I always double-check the lids. Bear canisters aren't complicated, but if the threads don't seat right, a determined animal can pop them. Scott laid out his sleeping pad and bag, then grabbed the water filter and headed to the lake to top off our bottles. I gathered small sticks and dry bark for a fire later, and built a neat stack next to the stone ring between our tents. The afternoon was quiet. We ate trail mix and dried mango, talked about work stress, and watched the light change on the granite. A pair of ravens called from the cliffs and glided across the basin without flapping. The air was cool but not cold, and the sun felt good on my face. By 4 p.m., the shadow line crept across the lake and the temperature dropped fast. We put on puffy jackets and started a small fire in the ring. That's when the smell hit. It came in on a breeze from the southwest, rolled through camp, and sat heavy for a good 10 minutes. It wasn't skunk. It wasn't the sulfur smell you get near thermal features. It was organic and old, like a wet dog bed left in a garage with a layer of rotting compost underneath. It had a thickness to it, almost greasy, and I could taste it when I swallowed. Scott wrinkled his nose and looked at me. "Bear?" he asked. "Maybe," I said. "Upwind." We scanned the tree line and the slope behind us. Nothing moved. The smell faded gradually, not all at once, and after 15 minutes it was gone. We joked about it being a bear that had rolled in something dead, but neither of us fully believed that. Bears smell musky, sure, but this was different. Heavier, more rancid. We cooked dinner on Scott's camp stove. Dehydrated chili, tortillas, instant coffee, We ate in our camp chairs and watched the last light fade from the cliffs. The fire burned low and clean, just enough to take the edge off the cold. By 8 p.m., the stars were out and the basin went dark. Our headlamps carved small circles of light, and beyond that was just mass and shadow. At 8:15, we heard the first knock. It came from across the lake, maybe 200 yards out, near the base of the cliffs. It was a single, deep, resonant thud. Wood on wood, flat and deliberate. Not a branch falling, not a rock slide. It had weight and intention behind it. Scott stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. We both listened. 30 seconds later, another knock answered from the opposite side of the basin, off to our right in the timber. Same tone, same deliberate rhythm. Two sources, separated by distance, communicating. "What the hell?" Scott said quietly. I didn't have an answer. I've heard woodpeckers. I've heard trees crack in the cold. This wasn't either. It was controlled. Scott grabbed his trekking pole, stood up, and whacked it twice against a log near the fire ring. The sound was sharp and high compared to what we'd heard. He grinned at me like it was a game. "Maybe it's hikers," he said. I didn't think it was hikers. Hikers don't communicate by banging sticks in the dark. But I didn't say anything. We sat and waited. No more knocks came. The fire popped. A light breeze moved through the firs. The lake lapped against the stones. At 8:45, I noticed the first rock. It was a smooth river stone, about the size of a softball, sitting near the edge of the fire ring. I'd walked past that spot a dozen times, setting up camp and gathering wood. It hadn't been there before. I pointed it out to Scott. "Did you put that there?" I asked. He shook his head. "No." "You?" "No." We stared at it. It sat in a spot where we would have kicked it or tripped over it earlier. The placement was deliberate, right on the line between the firelight and the shadows. 10 minutes later, another rock appeared. This one was smaller, oval-shaped, placed about 6 feet closer to Scott's tent. I hadn't heard it land. I hadn't heard footsteps. It was just there. Scott stood up and scanned the area with his headlamp. "This isn't funny," he called out into the dark. No reply. No movement. Just the quiet rush of wind through the trees. A third rock appeared while we were both looking the other direction, adjusting the fire. This one sat between our two tents, closer than the others. I felt my stomach tighten. Whatever was placing these stones was moving silently, testing us, getting closer. "We should get in the tents," I said. Scott nodded. We kicked dirt over the fire to smother it, secured the food canisters one more time, and zipped into our separate shelters. I kept my headlamp on low and my boots inside the vestibule. I could hear Scott rustling in his tent, getting into his sleeping bag. For a while, nothing happened. I listened to my own breathing and the faint sound of the lake. My watch read 9:30 p.m. I told myself we were overreacting. Rocks move. Maybe we missed them earlier. Maybe the wind rolled them into place. Then I heard the footsteps. They were heavy and measured, not the light patter of a deer or the scuffle of a raccoon. These were bipedal. Heel, toe, heel, toe. Long strides, slow and deliberate. They paced in an arc around our camp, just outside the range where my headlamp beam would reach if I unzipped the tent and shined it out. I held my breath and listened. The steps moved from my left to my right, crossing behind Scott's tent, then continuing around toward the lake edge. When they reached a spot directly across from my tent, they stopped. Silence. I waited. My heart hammered in my chest. The footsteps resumed, this time moving back the other direction. Same pace. Same weight. When I clicked my headlamp to full brightness and pointed it at the tent wall, the steps stopped. When I turned the light back down, they started again. "Tyler," Scott whispered from his tent. "You hearing this?" "Yeah." "What is it?" "I don't know." The pacing continued for another 20 minutes. It never came closer than 30 feet, but it never left either. It circled us like something studying a problem, patient and deliberate. At one point, I heard branches snap high up, 7 or 8 feet off the ground, like something had reached up and pulled them down as it passed. At 11 p.m., the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound. I didn't sleep. I lay on my pad with my eyes open, listening to every creak and rustle outside. Scott didn't sleep either. I could hear him shifting positions, adjusting his bag. Around 2 a.m., I had to pee. I didn't want to leave the tent, but my bladder wasn't giving me a choice. I unzipped the vestibule slowly, clicked my headlamp to full, and stepped out in my long underwear and boots. The air was cold and sharp, my breath fogged. I walked 10 feet from my tent, positioned myself so I could keep both shelters in my peripheral vision, and relieved myself quickly. That's when I saw it. Behind Scott's tent, near the edge of the tree line, something rose from a crouch. At first, I thought it was a bear. The mass was right. The dark shape against the darker trees made sense. But then it kept rising. Shoulders cleared the peak of Scott's tent, then a head, then it stood fully upright. And I realized with a cold, creeping certainty that I was looking at something over 8 feet tall. The frame was broad through the chest and shoulders, but not fat. The arms were long, hanging past where human proportions would place them. The head sat forward on the neck, slightly hunched. I couldn't see details. No eyes. No face, just a silhouette that didn't move like any animal I knew. It stood there, watching me. It didn't charge. It didn't make a sound. It just watched. I backed toward my tent without turning around, keeping my eyes on the shape. My hands shook as I gripped the tent pole for balance. I whispered Scott's name, low and urgent. "Scott, get up. We're leaving." "What? What?" "Get up, pack your bag. We're leaving right now." I heard him fumble with his sleeping bag. "What's going on?" "Just trust me. Pack. Now." I crawled into my tent, stuffed my sleeping bag into its sack without rolling it, shoved my pad and clothes into my pack, and pulled on my pants and jacket. My hands moved on autopilot. I didn't look outside again. I didn't want to see if it had moved closer. Scott emerged from his tent, pack half closed, boots unlaced. He looked at me, then passed me toward the tree line. His face went pale. "Oh my God," he said quietly. "Don't run," I said. "We're going to walk. Nice and calm. Headlamps on. Stay close." We shouldered our packs, clipped our hip belts, and started down the trail at a steady pace. I didn't look back. Scott walked beside me, breathing hard, but keeping the pace controlled. Our headlamps bobbed on the trail ahead, lighting up roots and rocks. Behind us, the footsteps started again. They followed us down the trail, heavy and deliberate, matching our speed, not rushing, not closing the gap, just following. The sound stayed about 50 yards back, consistent and patient. We reached the first switchback and kept moving. The footsteps stayed with us. At the second switchback, Scott whispered, "It's still there." "I know. Keep going." We descended through the dark forest, our lights cutting narrow tunnels through the trees. The footsteps echoed behind us, a steady rhythm that never faltered. My calves burned from the downhill grade, but I didn't slow. Neither did Scott. At the third switchback, we crossed a small creek. The wooden bridge rattled under our boots. We stepped off the far side and kept walking. The footsteps stopped. I slowed and looked back. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Just the quiet trickle of water over stones. Did it stop? Scott asked. Yeah. We stood there for a moment, listening. The forest was still. Whatever had followed us down the trail had stopped at the creek and decided not to cross. We didn't wait to see if it would change its mind. We walked the remaining 3 miles to the trailhead in silence, reaching the parking lot at 4:45 a.m. The sky was still dark, but a faint gray line showed on the eastern horizon. We threw our packs in the truck, climbed in, and locked the doors. Scott started the engine and turned the heat on full. We sat there, not talking, just breathing and warming our hands in front of the vents. After a few minutes, he looked at me. What the hell was that? I don't know, I said, but it was big, and it was watching us. We drove to the ranger station in Skycomish and waited in the parking lot until it opened at 6 a.m. A ranger named Laura came out with a coffee mug in her hand and a radio on her belt. She saw us sitting there and walked over. You guys okay? She asked. I told her everything. The smell, the knocks, the rocks, the pacing footsteps, the shape behind the tent, the way it followed us to the creek and stopped. I kept it factual and linear. Scott nodded along and added details I missed. Laura listened without interrupting. When I finished, she pulled out a small notebook and wrote down the date, location, and our names. She didn't smile. She didn't act like we were making it up. Lake Serene Upper Basin gets reports like this most falls, she said. Usually late September through October. Big footprints, knocking sounds, rocks placed in camps. We log it every time. What is it? Scott asked. She looked at him for a moment, then back at me. We don't put a name on it in the reports. We just note the behavior. Territorial signaling, non-aggressive but persistent. We advise groups of 4 or more during that window, and we tell people to camp lower if they're just 2. Have people been hurt? I asked. No, she said. Not that we've documented, but people have left in the middle of the night, just like you did. You made the right call. She handed me a card with the district office number and told us to call if we remembered anything else. Then, she went back inside. We drove back to Seattle in silence. My hands finally stopped shaking somewhere around Monroe. Scott stared out the window and didn't say much. When we hit the city, he turned to me. Are we going to talk about what that was? I don't know what it was, I said, but I know what it looked like. Bigfoot, he said. Not a question, a statement. I nodded. I didn't have a better word for it. The size, the bipedal movement, the intelligence behind the behavior. It fit. We unloaded our gear at my apartment and Scott headed home. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment it stood up behind the tent, the way it rose and kept rising, the breadth of its shoulders, the length of its arms. I thought about the footsteps that followed us down the trail and stopped at the water. A week later, I called the ranger station and asked Laura if she'd heard anything else from that area. She said 2 more groups had reported knocking sounds and rock placements at the upper basin over the weekend. Both groups were pairs. Both left early. Scott and I still hike together. We still go to the Cascades, but we changed our rules. No camps at Lake Serene in fall. No overnight trips with just 2 people during September or October. We pick trails with more traffic and established campgrounds where other groups are nearby. I don't need to prove anything. I don't need to go back and get a photo or a footprint cast. I know what I saw, and I know how it made me feel. Small, observed, tolerated, but not welcome. If you're planning to camp at Lake Serene, go in summer. Go with a group. If you're there in fall and you hear knocking sounds that answer each other across the basin, if rocks start appearing in your camp that you didn't place, if you hear footsteps pacing outside your tent, that stop when you shine a light and start again when you don't, Pack your gear, keep your voice calm, and walk out. Don't wait to see what's making the sounds. Don't wait until it stands up and shows you how tall it really is. Just leave. The mountain will still be there in the morning, and so will whatever called it home first. If you've had a similar experience, or if this story helped you understand something that happened to you in the backcountry, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a comment below. And if you found this useful, hitting the like button helps others find these stories. Subscribe if you want more accounts like this. Real experiences. No exaggeration. Just what happened, and how we handled it. Stay safe out there. I thought my father was superstitious when he refused to explain why we never drove Road 2324 after October. I know better now, but it cost me a truck and my nerve to learn it. My dad logged in the Gifford Pinchot for 30 years. He knew every spur road, every cat track, every landing from Randall to Trout Lake. When I started hunting elk at 16, he taught me how to read contour maps, how to spot fresh rubs on alders, and how to move through timber without snapping every dead branch under my boots. He also gave me a list of roads I wasn't allowed to drive alone after the first week of October. No explanation, no stories, just a firm rule delivered the same way he'd tell me to check my oil before a long drive. Road 2324 was on that list. I'm 32 now. My dad passed 4 years ago from a heart attack while cutting firewood behind his shop. I inherited his tools, his truck, and his maps. The maps had notes in the margins, faded pencil marks next to certain road numbers, next to 2324. He'd written in block letters, "Stay out Oct November." I'd driven 2324 plenty of times in summer and early fall. It's a decommissioned spur that branches off Forest Road 23 south of Randall, climbs through a clear cut from the 90s, and dead ends at an old landing with a view into the dark divide. It's prime elk country. The road's rough but passable in a high clearance rig, and I'd glassed bulls from that landing in September without issue. I figured my dad's rule had something to do with weather or road conditions once the rain started. Made sense. These old spurs turn to grease when they're wet. Mid-October. I took a Wednesday off work to scout before the general rifle opener. I wasn't hunting yet, just looking for sign, checking trails, and glassing clear cuts to see where the herds were staging. The forecast called for partly cloudy skies and highs in the low 50s. Perfect. I loaded my truck with my spotting scope, binoculars, a thermos of coffee, a paper Forest Service map, my GPS unit, and my rifle in its hard case. I wasn't planning to shoot anything, but you don't drive back roads in the Cascades unarmed. Not because of people, because of what might walk out in front of you at dusk. I left my place in Olympia at 5:30 a.m. and reached the turnoff to Road 23 by 7:15. The pavement was wet from overnight rain, but the clouds were starting to break up. I passed a few other trucks heading toward different spur roads, all of them with rifle cases visible in the back windows. Opening weekend was 10 days out, and everyone was doing the same thing I was, scouting, learning. I turned onto Road 2324 at 7:45. The gate was open, which surprised me. Forest Service usually closes decommissioned roads after hunting season, but sometimes they leave them open if the road's stable and there's no active logging. The surface was packed dirt and gravel, rutted in spots but dry enough to hold traction. Alder and young fir pressed in from both sides, and the canopy overhead filtered the light into soft gray-green. A quarter-mile in, I hit the first barrier. 3 trees had been laid across the road in an X pattern. They weren't old blowdowns. The bark was fresh, the cambium layer still light-colored where the trunks had been snapped. Each tree was about 8 inches in diameter, and they'd been placed deliberately. The ends were keyed into the ditch on either side so they wouldn't roll. I stopped the truck and got out to look. The brakes weren't clean like a saw cut. They were splintered and twisted, the way a tree breaks when it's pulled or levered with force. I scanned the tree line. No chainsaw marks. No boot prints in the dirt. Just these 3 trees stacked to block the road. I've seen the Forest Service block roads before. They use cable gates, concrete barriers, or big boulders. They don't stack trees in an X. That's not policy. That's something else. I thought about turning around. That's what my gut told me to do. But I'd driven an hour and a half to get here, and the elk I'd seen in September weren't going to move themselves. I told myself someone was trying to keep side-by-sides out, or maybe it was left over from a trail crew project. I put the truck in 4-wheel drive, eased off the road into the shallow ditch, and drove around the barrier. The road climbed steady after that. I shifted into 2nd gear and took it slow. The clear cut opened up on my right, a long slope of chest-high fireweed and scattered stumps. Beyond that, the dark divide rose in ridges of old-growth timber and basalt cliffs. Good country. Big country. At the 1-mile mark, I found another barrier. This one was smaller. 2 logs propped against each other like a lean-to, blocking half the road. I could have driven around it without leaving the road surface, but I stopped instead. Something about the placement felt deliberate, like a warning that was getting louder. I sat in the cab for a minute, engine idling, and looked at those logs. Then, I looked at the clear cut. Then I looked at my dad's map on the passenger seat with his handwritten note. Stay out Oct November. I should have turned around right there. Instead, I drove around the 2nd barrier and kept climbing. The road narrowed as it gained elevation. Alder branches scraped the mirrors. The ruts deepened. At one point, I had to stop and move a rock the size of a basketball out of the way. It sat dead center in the road, placed there like a message. I kicked it into the ditch and kept going. At 8:30, I reached a wide spot where the road flattened out near the edge of the clear cut. I pulled over, killed the engine, and grabbed my binoculars. The air was cold and still. I could hear a creek running somewhere below me in the timber. I glassed the clear cut for 10 minutes, looking for movement, checking the edge where the cut met the standing timber. No elk. No deer. Not even a raven. I set the binoculars on the hood and walked a few yards downslope to get a better angle. The fireweed was damp and stuck to my pants. I could see old elk trails cutting across the slope, packed dirt lines through the vegetation. Fresh tracks would show up dark against the lighter soil. I made a mental note to come back here on opening morning if the weather held. When I walked back to the truck, I saw the handprint. It was on the driver's side window, pressed into the thin layer of dust that had settled during the drive up. The palm was flat and wide, fingers splayed. What stopped me cold was the height. The center of the palm sat level with the top of the window frame. I'm 6 feet tall, and I'd have to reach up to press my hand there. This print was casual, placed without effort, like someone tall had leaned against the truck while I was glassing. The fingers were long, longer than mine. The spacing was wide. I put my own hand next to it for comparison and felt my stomach drop. Each finger was at least an inch wider. The thumb curved in a way that looked human, but the proportions were off. Too big. Too strong. I scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. No sound except the creak and the faint rustle of wind through the alders. I walked a slow circle around the truck, checking for boot prints in the dirt. There were none, just my own tracks leading downslope and back. I got in the truck, locked the doors, and sat there with the engine off. My hands were shaking. I told myself it could have been there before I stopped. Maybe I just hadn't noticed it, but I knew that was a lie. I'd checked the mirrors when I parked. I'd looked at that window. The print was fresh. I started the engine and kept driving up the road. I don't know why. Maybe because turning around felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. Maybe because my dad had never explained his rule, and I needed to know what he'd known. The road got worse. Deeper ruts, more rocks, branches hanging lower. At one point, I had to fold in the side mirrors to squeeze through. The clear-cut fell away behind me, and the road entered a tunnel of second-growth timber. Douglas fir and hemlock pressed in close, blocking most of the light. That's when I heard the knocks. The first one came from upslope to my left. A single deep thud. Wood on wood. Resonant and deliberate. It echoed down through the trees and rolled over the truck. I stopped and rolled down the window to listen. 10 seconds later, an answer came from downslope to my right. Same tone, same weight. Then another from farther up the road ahead of me. 3 points. Triangulating my position, I've heard woodpeckers. I've heard trees crack in the cold. This wasn't either. These were controlled strikes, spaced with intention, communicating across distance. I put the truck in gear and kept moving. The knocks continued, always ahead of me, always off to the side, always just far enough away that I couldn't see what was making them. My heart hammered in my chest. My hands gripped the wheel tight enough to hurt. 100 yards ahead, something crossed the road. It moved from right to left in 3 long strides, upright, bipedal, massive through the shoulders and chest. The arms swung low, past the hips, and the head sat forward on the neck. It didn't look at me. It didn't pause. It just crossed the road like it owned the ground and disappeared into the timber on the far side. I slammed on the brakes. The truck rocked to a stop in the middle of the road. I stared at the spot where it had crossed. The alders where it had entered the trees were still swaying, branches moving in sequence like something big had pushed through. I said the word out loud. Bigfoot. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a joke. It was the only word that fit what I'd just seen. The size, the movement, the proportions. That wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk upright for 3 strides with that kind of ease. That wasn't a person. People don't have arms that long, or shoulders that wide. I needed to turn around. The road ahead was getting narrower, and I didn't know how far it went before it dead-ended. But I couldn't turn around here. The road was too narrow. I'd get stuck trying to angle the truck across the ruts. I kept driving. Slowly. Eyes scanning the trees on both sides. The knocks had stopped. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No birds. No wind. Just the low rumble of my engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. A quarter-mile later, I found a wide spot. It was an old landing, flat and open, just big enough to turn a logging truck around back when this road was active. I pulled in, put the truck in reverse, and started a 3-point turn. That's when the truck started rocking. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the suspension settling. It was a deliberate, rhythmic push from the passenger side. The whole frame tilted left, held for a second, then rocked back. Then it happened again. Left. Hold. Back. Like something was testing the weight, seeing how hard it could push before the truck tipped. I stomped on the gas. The tires spun in the gravel and caught. The truck lurched forward and straightened out. I cranked the wheel hard right, shifted into drive, and punched it. The engine roared. Gravel sprayed. The truck fishtailed once and then shot forward down the road the way I'd come. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see what had been pushing on the truck. I just drove. The road dropped fast. I hit the ruts harder than I should have, bottoming out twice. But I didn't slow down. The trees blurred past. The engine screamed in second gear. My knuckles were white on the wheel. Then the truck started rolling backward. I was still in gear. The engine was still running. My foot was on the gas, but the truck was losing momentum, slowing, and then rolling backward down the hill like I'd thrown it in neutral. I slammed on the brakes. Nothing. The pedal went to the floor, but the truck kept rolling. I yanked the parking brake. Nothing. I shifted into park. The transmission clunked, but the wheels kept turning. I was rolling backward toward a blind curve at 15 miles an hour with no control. I gripped the wheel and tried to steer, tried to keep the truck in the center of the road so I wouldn't slide into the ditch. The curve was coming up fast. If I went off the edge, the truck would roll. I'd be stuck, or worse. 30 feet from the curve, the truck lurched forward like it had been released. The wheels caught. The engine roared. I shot forward down the hill so fast I almost lost control on the next turn. But I held it. I kept the truck on the road and I didn't stop until I hit pavement. Forest Road 23 felt like a lifeline. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder, put the truck in park, and sat there shaking. My chest heaved. My hands trembled. I looked back at the entrance to Road 2000. 324, half hidden in the trees. A figure stood in the middle of the dirt road. Tall, broad, dark, against the lighter background of the clear-cut beyond. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. I put the truck in drive and left. I drove straight to the ranger station in Randall. It was a small building off Highway 12, staffed by 2 district rangers and a volunteer. I walked in at 10:15, still shaking, and asked to speak to someone about Road 2324. A ranger named Tom came out from the back office. He was in his 50s, gray beard, green uniform, radio on his belt. He looked at me and said, "You okay?" I told him everything. The barriers, the handprint, the knocks, the figure crossing the road, the truck rocking, the backward roll. I kept it linear and factual. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. Tom listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly and walked over to a filing cabinet. He pulled out a binder, flipped through it, and set it on the counter in front of me. It was an incident log, road-specific, handwritten entries going back to the 90s. He tapped a page dated October 1987. Vehicle interference, Road 2000, 324. Driver reported rocking motion and loss of braking on descent. No mechanical failure found. He flipped forward. October 1993. Large bipedal figure observed crossing road near mile marker 2. Witness, credible, experienced hunter. October 2001. Wood knocking sounds reported. Triangulated pattern. Multiple witnesses. October 2009. Handprints on vehicle windows. Height inconsistent with human placement. Tom looked at me. "Your last name's Brennan, right?" I nodded. "Your dad was Ray Brennan. Logged these roads in the 80s and 90s. Yeah." Tom closed the binder. "He tried to warn you, didn't he?" It wasn't a question. "He had a list of roads," I said. Never explained why. Tom leaned against the counter. "Ray had an encounter on 2000, 324 inches, October of 86. Didn't file an official report, but he told me about it over a beer one night. Said something followed his crew truck down the mountain, paced them for 2 miles, and stopped at the pavement. Said he'd never drive that road alone and fall again. He kept that promise." My throat tightened. Why didn't he just tell me? Would you have believed him? I didn't answer. Tom tapped the binder. "We don't officially close 2324. There's no legal reason to, but we don't maintain it either. We don't advertise it. And when someone asks about it in October, we suggest other roads. Most people take the hint." "What is it?" I asked. "What's up there?" Tom looked at me for a long moment. "Something big. Something that doesn't like company in the fall." Acorns drop, huckleberries are done, elk move through, and whatever lives up there gets territorial. It doesn't hurt people as far as we know. It just encourages them to leave. Bigfoot, I said. Tom didn't confirm or deny. He just said, "We logged the reports. That's all we can do." I thanked him and walked out. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and called my uncle, my dad's younger brother. He picked up on the second ring. "Did Dad ever tell you about Road 2324? I asked. There was a long pause. Then my uncle said, "He told me to stay off it in October. Said he saw something up there that made him reconsider a lot of things. Wouldn't say what, just said if I respected him, I'd respect the rule. I drove it today." I said. Another pause. "You okay?" "Yeah, but I won't do it again." "Good," my uncle said. Ray knew what he was talking about. He didn't make rules for fun. I hung up and drove home. I didn't hunt that drainage on opening weekend. I didn't go back to Road 2324. I found elk in a different unit, filled my tag on a ridge above Cispus River, and packed the meat out over 2 trips. Clean, simple, no drama. But I think about that day every October. I think about the handprint on my window, the figure crossing the road, the way my truck rolled backward with the engine running. I think about my dad's notes on his maps and the rules he gave me without explanation. I understand now why he didn't explain. Some things you can't explain until someone's ready to hear them. And even then, the explanation doesn't matter as much as the rule itself. I still hunt the Gifford Pinchot. I still scout in October. But I don't drive decommissioned roads alone, and I don't ignore barriers that weren't there the year before. If a road feels wrong, I turn around before I need a place to turn around. And I keep my dad's map in the truck, with his notes in the margins, because those notes aren't superstition. They're hard-earned knowledge passed down from someone who learned the same way I did, the hard way. If someone who knows the woods gives you a rule without explanation, trust it anyway. They're not keeping secrets. They're keeping you safe. If you've had a similar experience on a back road, or if this helped you understand something your family warned you about, I'd appreciate it if you'd share your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, hitting the like button helps others find these accounts. Subscribe if you want more real experiences from the backcountry. No exaggeration. Just what happened, and how we handle it. Stay safe out there. My brother swore he'd never go back to the Cascades after what we saw. 3 months later, I found out why he kept that promise. Danny and I have been hiking together since we were kids. I'm 36, he's 28, and we've done the same November tradition for the last 6 years. One last trip before the snow closes the high country. 3 days, 2 nights, a loop through the North Cascades that starts at Colonial Creek Campground and climbs through old-growth forest into alpine meadows before dropping back down through Thunder Creek drainage. It's a solid 22-mile loop with about 4,000 feet of gain. We've done it enough times that we don't need to look at the map except to confirm mileage. This was supposed to be year 7. Early November, the forecast showed a clear window. Highs in the low 40s, overnight lows in the 20s. No precipitation. We took Thursday and Friday off work, loaded our packs Wednesday night, and drove up from Seattle in the morning. We had our permits, bear canisters, cold weather bags, layers, an inReach device, water filters, and enough food for 4 days in case weather pinned us down. We'd done this route in worse conditions. We weren't worried. We parked at the Colonial Creek trailhead at 9 a.m. on Thursday. The parking lot was nearly empty. One other car, Washington plates, hiking boots visible in the back seat. The ranger station was closed for the season, but the permit box was out, and we dropped our completed form in the slot. The air was cold and clean. The kind of sharp clarity you get after the first hard freeze kills the bugs and thins out the undergrowth. The trail starts flat along Thunder Creek, then climbs steady through dense forest. Douglas fir, western red cedar, hemlock. The canopy was mostly bare, and the forest floor was covered in a thick mat of fallen needles and decomposing leaves. Our boots crunched softly. We talked about work, about Danny's new apartment in Tacoma, about whether we'd see any late-season deer. 2 miles in, we found the first tree. It was a young hemlock about 8 inches in diameter, and someone or something had stripped the bark off in a clean vertical line from about chest height up to 10 feet. The bark wasn't chewed or scratched. It was peeled. Long strips of cambium hung in curled pieces at the base like wood shavings. The exposed wood underneath was pale and smooth, still wet with sap. Danny stopped and ran his hand along the stripped section. What did this? I looked at the height. Too high for a deer. Too clean for a bear. Elk? Elk rub with their antlers. This looks like it was pulled off by hand. Danny looked at me. By hand? I didn't answer. I didn't have a good one. We kept walking. A 1/4 mile later, we found another tree. Same pattern. Vertical strip. Bark peeled clean. 8 to 10 feet high. Then another. Then another. 5 trees total in the span of a mile, all on the right side of the trail, all stripped the same way. Someone's marking territory, Danny said. Or something, I added. He didn't laugh. We reached our first camp at Thunder Basin around 3 p.m. It's a designated site with a fire ring, a flat area for tents, and a bare wire for hanging food. We don't use the wire. We use canisters and keep them 20 yards from the tents. The site sits on a bench above the creek with a good view across the drainage toward the ridge we'd climb the next day. We set up our tents, filtered water, and started a small fire. The temperature was dropping fast as the sun dipped behind the ridge. By 5 p.m., we were in our puffy jackets. By 6, we had our gloves on. We cooked freeze-dried meals on our stoves and ate in our camp chairs, watching the light fade from the sky. At 7:30, the footsteps started. They came from the tree line behind our tents, about 30 yards back where the forest thickened. Heavy, deliberate, heel-toe, bipedal. The stride was long, and the weight was substantial. You could hear the compressed duff under each step, the way it settled and didn't spring back. Danny and I both stopped chewing. We listened. The steps moved from our left to our right in a slow arc, pacing the edge of the firelight. When they reached the far side, they stopped. Hey, Danny called out. Someone there? No response. Just the crackle of the fire and the distant rush of the creek. The steps resumed, moving back the other direction. Same pace, same weight. When they stopped again, I grabbed my headlamp and clicked it to full brightness. I stood and aimed the beam at the tree line. Nothing. Just trunks and shadow and a few low branches swaying like something had just brushed past them. Wind? Danny asked, but his voice didn't sound convinced. There's no wind, I said. We sat back down. The steps started again, this time farther out, maybe 50 yards back. They moved in the same arc, circling our position, always staying just beyond where we could see clearly. Bear? Danny offered. Bears don't walk like that. Then what? I didn't want to say the word. Not yet. Not out loud. So I just said, something big. We kept the fire going until 10 p.m., then smothered it and retreated to our tents. I lay in my sleeping bag with my headlamp around my neck and my knife within reach. Not that a knife would do much against something that size, but it gave me a task, a focus. The footsteps continued for another hour, pacing, stopping, resuming, always at a distance, never closer than 30 yards. Around 11 p.m., they stopped entirely. I didn't sleep well. Every time I started to drift, I'd hear a branch snap or the creak of a tree and I'd jerk awake. Morning came cold and gray. Frost covered the tents and our breath fogged thick. Danny was already up, boiling water for coffee. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "You hear it all night?" I asked, until about 11. Then nothing. We ate oatmeal, broke camp, and loaded our packs. The plan was to climb 4 miles and 2,000 feet to the pass, drop down into the next drainage, and camp at McAllister Creek. It was the longest day of the loop, but the views from the pass made it worth the effort. The trail climbed through thinning forest and opened into scattered meadows. The grass was brown and frozen, crunching under our boots. At one point, we crossed a small creek on stepping stones, and I noticed tracks in the mud on the far bank. They were fresh, deep impressions, longer than my boot, wider through the midfoot. The toes were splayed, and there were no claw marks. The stride between prints was at least 4 feet. Danny saw them too. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and I saw the same cold understanding in his eyes that I felt in my gut. We kept climbing. At the 2-mile mark, we started seeing the cairns. They weren't on the trail. They were off to the side, stacked in a line that led toward the ridge to our right. Each cairn was about chest high, built from rocks that would take 2 people to lift. They were spaced 50 yards apart, deliberate and evenly placed, like someone was marking a route. "Trail crew?" Danny asked. "Trail crew uses blazes and signs, not rock piles." "Then who?" I looked at the ridge. The cairns led up toward the tree line where the alpine thinned out into scrub and rock. Maybe it's not who. Maybe it's what. Danny stared at me. "You think something built these?" "I think something stacked those rocks. Whether it did it on purpose or not, I don't know." We stayed on the trail. The cairns continued to our right, always visible, always leading upslope. At one point, I counted 7 of them in a row before they disappeared over a rise. The trail itself started showing signs, too. Fresh branches laid across the tread in X patterns. Not fallen, placed. Every quarter mile, another X. Small at first. Just 2 sticks crossed. Then larger. Then a full arrangement of limbs stacked and keyed together like someone was building barriers. "This is a warning," Danny said. "Yeah, we should turn around." I stopped and looked back the way we'd come. We'd climbed almost 3 miles. The pass was another mile ahead. Turning around meant adding 6 miles to the trip and backtracking to a lower camp. It also meant admitting we were being pushed out. "Let's get to the pass," I said. "If it's worse on the other side, we'll bail." Danny hesitated, then nodded. We climbed the last mile in silence. The trees thinned to scrub, then disappeared entirely. The pass opened up in front of us, a saddle of rock and frozen grass with views into the next drainage. The wind hit us hard, cold and steady, and we hunkered behind a boulder to drink water and eat trail mix. From the pass, we could see the trail dropping into McAllister Creek drainage. The forest below looked dense and dark, even in daylight. Our camp was supposed to be 3 miles down, nestled in a flat area near the creek. "Looks fine," I said, trying to convince myself as much as Danny. We descended into the trees. The wind cut off, and the air went still. Too still. No birds, no squirrels, just our boots on the trail and the sound of our breathing. We reached McAllister Creek Camp at 4 p.m. It was smaller than Thunder Basin, just 2 flat spots for tents and a fire ring. The creek ran fast and clear about 20 yards away, cutting through a narrow channel of smooth stones. We set up our tents, secured our canisters, and gathered wood before the light faded. Dinner was quiet. We cooked, we ate, we cleaned up. The fire burned low. The cold pressed in. By 8 p.m., we were both in our tents with our bags zipped tight. At 9:15, we heard the voices. The first one came from the tree line upslope. It called my name. Me. E.K. It sounded almost like Danny. Almost. The pitch was right. The vowels were close. But the cadence was wrong. It stretched too long, pulled the syllables in a way that didn't match human speech. I unzipped my tent and looked over at Danny's shelter. His headlamp clicked on inside, and I saw his shadow sit upright. That wasn't me. He called over. I know. Then the second voice came from downslope, near the creek. Don-Nee. This one sounded like me. Same problem. Same stretched vowels. Same wrong rhythm. Danny unzipped his tent and stepped out. What the hell is that? I don't know. The voices repeated. Me-Eek. From upslope. Don-Nee. From downslope. Then they stopped. We stood there in the cold, headlamps cutting narrow beams into the darkness. The creek rushed. The fire popped. Nothing moved. We're leaving, Danny said. His voice was flat. Final. Now. First light. I'm not staying here another night. I didn't argue. We retreated to our tents and lay awake. The voices didn't come back, but the footsteps did. They paced around the camp in the same slow arc, circling, stopping, resuming. Closer this time. Maybe 20 yards. I could hear the brush rustle as something moved through it. At one point, I heard a low exhale. Not a growl, not a huff. Just a long, controlled breath from something with a big chest. I didn't sleep. Danny didn't either. I could hear him shifting in his bag, adjusting his position every few minutes. At 5:30 a.m., the sky started to lighten. I got up, put on my boots, and stepped outside. The frost was thick on everything. My breath hung in the air. I walked to the fire ring and stirred the coals, looking for any heat left. Nothing. Danny emerged from his tent, face pale, eyes dark. Let's pack. We broke camp in silence. No coffee. No breakfast. Just stuffed our bags, rolled our pads, and loaded our packs. I walked to the creek to filter water for the hike out. Danny stayed at the tents, securing his pack straps. I knelt by the creek, dipped the filter intake into the current, and started pumping. The water was cold and clear, and the sound of it rushing over stones was the only noise in the drainage. Then Danny yelled, "Mike!" I dropped the filter and ran. He was standing between the tents, staring upslope. His arm was extended, pointing. I followed his line of sight. 100 yards up the slope, standing at the tree line where the forest met the talus, was a figure. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. The shoulders were broad, the chest deep. The arms hung long, past where human arms would end. The head sat forward on the neck, and even at that distance, I could see the bulk of the frame. It wasn't a bear on hind legs. It wasn't a person in a suit. It was something else entirely. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching us. Bigfoot. Danny whispered. I nodded. We didn't run. We backed away slowly, keeping our eyes on the figure, and returned to our packs. We shouldered them without speaking, clipped our hip belts, and started down the trail at a steady pace. I looked back once. The figure was still there, standing in the same spot. We hiked for 20 minutes without stopping. The trail dropped fast, switchbacking through dense forest. My legs burned from the downhill grade, but I didn't slow. Danny was right behind me, breathing hard. At the 1 mile mark, I looked back again. The figure was following. It stayed on the trail, 100 yards behind us, moving at the same steady pace. It didn't hurry. It didn't try to close the gap. It just followed. It's still there, I said. Danny looked back, saw it, and cursed under his breath. Why is it following us? I don't know. Just keep moving. We descended another 2 miles. Every time I checked, the figure was there. Same distance, same pace. It wasn't trying to catch us. It was escorting us out. At the junction, where the loop reconnected with the main trail, I looked back one more time. The figure had stopped. It stood at the junction, right where the trail split, and watched us continue down toward the trailhead. We reached the parking lot at 11 a.m. The same car that had been there when we arrived was gone. Ours sat alone under the gray sky. We threw our packs in the bed, climbed into the cab, and locked the doors. I looked back at the trailhead. The figure was there, standing at the edge of the forest, barely visible in the shadow of the trees. It didn't step into the clearing. It didn't approach the parking lot. It just stood and watched. I started the engine and drove. We didn't talk on the drive home. Danny stared out the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. When I dropped him off at his apartment in Tacoma, he grabbed his pack and paused before closing the door. "I'm not going back," he said. "To that trail, to any of it. I'm done hiking. Danny, I'm serious, Mike. I'm done." He shut the door and walked inside. I drove home and unpacked my gear in a daze. I washed my clothes, aired out my tent, and cleaned my stove. Normal post-trip tasks. But nothing felt normal. That night, I filed a report with the North Cascades National Park Service. I described the stripped trees, the cairns, the branches across the trail, the voices, the figure at the tree line, and the way it followed us out. I kept it factual. I used the word Bigfoot once, because I didn't have a better term. A ranger called me back 2 days later. Her name was Angela. She listened to my account and didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "McAllister Creek drainage gets reports like this every November, usually the first 2 weeks of the month. We log them, but we don't close the area because the activity is non-aggressive." It called our names. I said, "I know. We've had that in other reports too. Vocal mimicry. It's unsettling, but it's not a threat indicator. It seems to be more about communication or territory. What is it?" Angela paused. "We don't classify it officially. We just note the patterns. Large bipedal figure, intelligent behavior, seasonal presence. November seems to be significant. Possibly related to food scarcity or pre-denning behavior. We don't know. Should people avoid that area? We recommend groups of 4 or more if you're camping in that drainage during November. Solo and pair camping tends to get more activity. Beyond that, it's your call." I thanked her and hung up. 3 months later, I got a text from Danny's girlfriend. She asked if I could call her. I did. "Danny's been seeing a therapist," she said. "He didn't want me to tell you, but I think you should know. Is he okay? Physically?" "Yeah, but he's been having dreams. The same one. Over and over. He's back at that camp, and the thing in the trees is getting closer every night. He wakes up in a sweat. He won't go camping. He won't even go for walks in the park near our place. He needs to process it." I said. "What we saw was real, and it shook him. That's normal. He thinks it's still watching him." I didn't know what to say to that. "Just check on him," she said. "He won't talk to me about it, but maybe he'll talk to you." I called Danny that night. He picked up on the 4th ring. "Hey," he said. His voice sounded flat. "Your girlfriend called me." Silence. "You doing okay?" I asked. "I keep dreaming about it," he said. "It's in the trees. Every night. It's closer. And in the dream, I know it's going to step out eventually. I just don't know when. It's not real, Danny. It was real when we were there, but it's not following you home." "How do you know?" I didn't have an answer. "I saw something, Mike. Something that shouldn't exist. And now I can't unsee it. Every time I close my eyes, it's there. standing at the tree line, watching. You need to talk to someone who understands this stuff. A therapist, maybe a researcher, someone who studied these encounters. I am talking to someone. She says it's trauma, PTSD. But it doesn't feel like trauma. It feels like I'm being reminded. Reminded of what? That we're not alone out there. And we never were. We talked for another 20 minutes. I tried to reassure him. Tried to tell him that time would help. That the dreams would fade. But I didn't believe it. And I don't think he did either. I haven't been back to that loop. I still hike the Cascades, but I avoid the North Cascades in November. I pick trails with more traffic, lower elevations, areas where the forests feel lighter and the tree lines don't press in so close. Danny kept his promise. He hasn't been back. Last I heard, he'd moved to Spokane to be closer to his girlfriend's family. He works a desk job now. No more weekends in the mountains. No more November traditions. I think about that figure sometimes. The way it stood at the tree line. Patient and still. The way it followed us out without ever closing the distance. The way it stopped at the boundary between the forest and the parking lot, like it knew exactly where its territory ended and ours began. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know if it was protecting something, or testing us, or just observing. All I know is that it called our names in voices that were almost right, and that was enough to change my brother's life. If you're hiking in the North Cascades in November, pay attention to the signs. Stripped bark, stacked rocks, branches across the trail, voices in the dark that sound like people you know but with the wrong rhythm. These aren't coincidences, they're communication. And if something calls your name from the tree line and the voice isn't quite right, don't answer. Don't stay to figure out why. Just pack your gear and leave. Some things are learning how to sound like us, and that should scare you more than the size or the strength or the footprints ever could. If this story resonated with you, or if you've experienced something similar in the backcountry, I'd appreciate it if you'd share your account in the comments below. Hitting the like button helps others find these stories, and subscribing means you'll get more real experiences from people who've encountered things they can't explain. No exaggeration, no fiction, just what happened. Stay safe out there.